think it's really important to kind of check in with your values. Don't hop on the train because it's like the new trend. You have to check in with yourself. Like, does this feel good for the type of business, for my value system? There's so many ways to be successful. And so, you're not selling your soul, so to speak.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Alex Schloe here with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. As always, so glad that you're here. Thank you for taking the time to learn with us today. Today's guest is Dr. Bonnie Koo. She is a master certified life coach, physician, and founder of Wealthy Mom MD. She is the money coach for women physicians, a proud graduate of Barnard College and Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, host of the Wealthy Mom MD podcast, and author of Defining Wealth for Women, Peace, Purpose, and Plenty of Cash. She currently resides in Tampa, Florida, but she travels all over. We talk about so many important things in this podcast about how to start a business, how to overcome imposter syndrome, the importance of networking, relationships, being in the right rooms, how she grew her business. She even shared some roadblocks and some challenges that she faced and how you can overcome them. And that'll save you a lot of time, save you a lot of money. This episode was fantastic, and I know that you will get a lot out of it. Can you do me a favor? Share this episode with a physician who needs to hear it. That is how this podcast grows. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Dr. Bonnie Koo. Dr. Bonnie Koo, welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I am so glad to have you as a guest today. Thanks for calling in all the way from Tampa. How are things going today?
Going great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you were highly recommended, so I'm honored to have you on the podcast. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Before we get started, do you mind telling folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Bonnie Koo. I am a dermatologist. I haven't practiced since 2020, however, and that's partially COVID related. We can talk about that if you'd like. And I grew up in New Jersey, did a lot of my training in New York City and then Southern California. As you know, medicine a lot of us move around a lot. And now I'm in Tampa, Florida.
That is awesome. Yeah, all over the place. And we were talking about your love for Hawaii earlier before we started recording. Well, did you always want to be a dermatologist? Did you always want to be a doctor? Or what did that journey into medicine look like for you?
Yeah, I've always been into science. I don't think I knew for sure I wanted to do medicine until college, but I was a biochemistry major and I didn't really consider myself I was kind of like, I'm either pre-med or pre-PhD, but that's kind of where I was. And so obviously I went the pre-med route and I worked at Morgan Stanley for 4 years before I went to medical school. That was not planned. I feel like I think life just kind of meandered for me and I just kind of followed it, if that makes sense. I didn't follow the prescribed college, med school, residency, like all in a row. So I was an older medical student. I wasn't the oldest, but I was probably the third or fourth oldest in my class. There was someone in their mid 30s, which obviously is not old, at our age now, although you look younger than me, but like in med school, that's old, right? So dermatologist, yeah, I went into medical school thinking I was going to be a dermatologist. And I remember everyone's like, oh, you're going to change your mind. Even in college, I was like, I'm going to be a biochem major. They're like, you're going to change your mind. I'm like, nope. The same thing in med school. I was like, nope, I'm going to be a dermatologist. So I didn't say I'm going to be an entrepreneur, though. That I was not on my radar.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure those life experiences and, spending some time at Morgan Stanley probably made you a better doctor and certainly made you a better entrepreneur because you had those things to relate to and draw back on. I love that. I love family medicine, but I think often that dermatology probably should have been the way that I should have gone. But
everyone thinks that, but it's, medicine's not in a good place when dermatologists are burned out. That
is very true. And medicine is not in a good place. And I'm sure we'll hit on that. But yeah, sounds like a lot of traveling amongst, throughout your medical training and education. Ended up in Florida during COVID. 2020 sounds like stopped practicing medicine. What was that impetus to stop practicing as a dermatologist? Kind of walk us through that if you don't mind.
No, of course. That wasn't planned. I had switched to locums in 2019 with really no plan. I was working locums the summer of 2019. And then I got a locums position in Hawaii, and that was for the winter, like December 2019, ended the end of February 2020. And we know what happened soon after. In fact, I was in Las Vegas for the White Coat Investor Conference when the pandemic was actually declared while I was there. So I did fly home early. And as you know, it was chaos. No one knew what the heck it was, how bad it was, all that stuff. And so I flew back to New Jersey, and New Jersey and New York City were kind of the early adopters of shutting down and masking. And so I actually was interviewing for part-time jobs. So my plan was to work part-time. And to me, that meant 3 days a week. And I did have my business at the time, but it wasn't like a full-fledged business. And so that was the plan, but then I couldn't get a job because no one was hiring. And so, it just dragged on and dragged on. And I actually was also doing telemedicine. That was even before the pandemic in terms of getting that job. And then the end of 2020, I realized I had no desire to see, I just had no desire to go back. I wasn't itching to go back. I did actually apply to do become a volunteer attending somewhere in it was after the vaccine. So was that 2021? It's all such a haze now. But even then I decided not because I didn't want to do it. It was because if I had the opportunity to just be at home in joggers and not have to mask, I'm pro mask, but wearing a mask all day is hard, with patient care. And my son was 2 at the time. And I was like, if I don't have to expose myself to the virus, because obviously the risk is you bring it home. So, and again, we didn't really know. So I just was like, no. And then it just kept dragging on. And then I was like, no, to going back.
That's awesome. And it's cool that you had that flexibility and the ability to not go back. And that's the beautiful thing about, what you're doing at Wealthy Mom MD and what this podcast is all about is how can you create some degree of financial freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want to? And you were able to do that through your businesses. Before we hit on that, I do kind of want to hit your path of practicing as a dermatologist, because you mentioned a couple things that are a little bit more atypical, at least from my understanding in the dermatology space, locums tenens and telemedicine. So what drew you to both of those and how did that look for you? And was there a plan behind that in terms of, hey, I'm going to do locums, I'm going to do telemedicine so I have some more flexibility to work on the business?
Yeah. So again, that wasn't planned either. So my first job out of residency, I was in academics. And again, I kind of always had a, desired, I was derm or bust during med school. And then during residency, I really wanted to do hospital-based medicine, hospital-based dermatology, which very few dermatologists wanted to. And so my first job was in academics in New York. And, there was a residency program. And I was the first director of hospital-based dermatology, basically doing consults. And yes, the patients were actually seen by my residents first. And then me, I would round every day when I was on service. So, and then we moved to Philadelphia for my partner's job. And so then I went into private practice. I did apply to Penn and some other places, but I don't remember exactly what happened. I think maybe I just decided to do private practice. And so it was okay. I didn't love private practice. I definitely enjoyed academics more because I was kind of by myself in the office. And, it's kind of really nice to have a collegial atmosphere. I really loved working with residents. They're so bright and shiny, And I love teaching and everything. And they kept me on my toes, because they are studying a lot more than, after, not that you don't keep up at all, but, it's different, during residency. And so I wasn't super happy there. And, some things happened. And so this locums opportunity came up. I just got an email. I'm sure you get emails all the time maybe, I don't know how much family medicine does locums. And I usually just delete them universally. I'm just like, oh, stop bothering me, And for some reason, I looked at it and it was Seattle for the summer. And I was like, So I applied and I got it. And then I was like, let's go. My partner was in between jobs at the point. His job in Philly didn't work out. So it kind of was just great timing. My son was 2. So it's not like we were pulling him out, of anything. So we did that. And then while I was in Seattle, I got another opportunity to be in Hawaii. And it was for Kaiser. And what was cool about that is I actually applied to Kaiser in Maui when I was pregnant, and they offered me the job, but we ended up not taking it for a number of reasons. And so it was really easy for me to get that job because I was a known entity. So I kind of got fast tracked there. And so it's a kind of a convoluted, so I kind of did everything: academics, private, locums, and then the telemedicine. I don't even remember how that came into my lap. I don't think I applied. I think someone told me they were looking for people, so I applied. And I had multiple licenses at that point because of locums. So obviously it makes it easier.
Absolutely. That's really cool. What was it like for your family doing locums? I know you mentioned your son was 2 years old, so a little bit less in terms of roots probably where you were at in Philly, but what was that like? Was that a good experience for you guys?
I think it's hard when one parent is tasked as the, the primary caretaker. It's hard, even with one child. And so I don't know if Matt enjoyed it that much. Jack's always been a handful, but Jack learned to swim in Hawaii, so they would just swim every day at the pool after he got lessons. It was 15 minutes a day for 1 week, by the way, and he knew how to swim. And so as a side note, I think weekly swimming lessons really doesn't cut it. They can learn really quickly, and that's how this person taught it, and it's extremely effective. It's all muscle memory, right? And then he was able to practice every day, so there's that. Anyway, so I think Hawaii was a great experience for us, but again, I think it was a little hard. In Seattle, we had our place in New Jersey at the time. So Matt and Jack kind of flew back and forth. They would stay with us for a week. It was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, by the way. And that was great. During our 2 weeks off, we would, explore the area. We went to Vancouver, Canada. We went to Victoria Island, which is a very cute and picturesque area. So that was his first international trip, Canada.
That's awesome. Well, Jack has a great name. That's my oldest son's name as well. So very cool there. And that's a cool experience to get to have the ability to travel, and that's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Man, that's awesome because you can really
cool,
do
yeah.
a lot in 2 weeks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's a really cool opportunity. I'm sure you're working hard the 2 weeks that you were on, but that's definitely a good bit of time to recharge and explore. And, that's a really cool locums setup. Family medicine, yeah, I get dozens of emails every day, it seems like, for locums jobs and different jobs. It's just such a huge shortage for family medicine, but we'll see. I don't know if the right one comes across. Maybe I'd consider that at some point, but right now, looking forward to direct primary care and getting involved.
Oh, are you starting your own practice?
I'm actually most likely, I haven't signed the contract yet, joining a practice here in Colorado Springs. It's an older physician. Dave, if you're listening to this, I'm not calling you old, but he's older and wants to ultimately kind of step back a bit coming up in the next few years. So bringing me in to help grow the business. And it'll be more part-time for me too, which is great. Really focused now on, now that we have some financial freedom, focused on, hey, how can I spend time with the people that matter most and spend more time with the family and do more traveling and more camping, which we love to do here in Colorado, and those sorts of things as well. So really looking forward to that. And I firmly believe direct primary care is such a huge step in the right direction.
So this is a DPC practice?
Yes, ma'am. Yep. This is a DPC
that's wonderful.
practice. Yeah, it's been open for about 7 years, pretty well established in the community. He has a much larger patient empanelment than he can handle on his own with the hours that he wants to work. And so I would take some of his patients and then we'd grow the business and then just continue to scale from that perspective. So still figuring out some details there, but really excited for the opportunity.
Yeah. So he was an early adopter of DPC, huh?
Yeah, he sure was. He was an Air Force doc like myself, and he retired from the Air Force, worked private practice, I think for about a year and a half, and was just like, this isn't for me. And so he kind of started doing some DPC while he was working in that private practice, and then he opened up his own clinic full time and has been doing it ever since. So he was an early adopter and doing great. And so I'm really excited to have the opportunity to learn from him, since the roots have already been planted, the business has already been established, and that way I can keep growing Physicians and Properties and our real estate ventures as well. So it's going to be a really great opportunity, I believe.
I mean, it's the way to go. We do direct. So we have a DPC pediatrician for my son, and then I have a concierge physician. So, I guess, DPC versus concierge, there's some distinctions, but there's a lot of similarities, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to practice medicine and a great way to receive care as well. So really looking
100%.
forward to that. Yeah. And if it wasn't for, entrepreneurship and real estate investing and so forth, I wouldn't even have the opportunity because I'm going to take a massive pay cut, to be honest. And that is worth it for me to have that freedom, to have that flexibility and to have that time with my family. And so, really, really looking forward to that. Well, I think now's a good time to pivot towards what you're doing, right? You're an incredible money coach. You've done a ton of amazing things in the financial space with Wealthy Mom MD. Do you mind sharing more about the origin story of that and how that came to be?
Yeah. So again, the theme, that wasn't planned. So after actually the last year of residency, when I was applying for jobs, it was clear. I was like, I don't know anything about money. Thankfully, I had 2 co-residents. They actually would talk about the stock market and talk about money, but I just, I was like, oh, they're talking about their money thing and whatever. And I guess one day I was curious and I was like, how do you guys know all this stuff? And so they actually recommended I read the White Coat Investor book. So I did. This was back in 2014 or so. And I read it and it was like, why hasn't anyone taught me this? I think a lot of us feel that way once we start on this journey. And so I just started sharing it with my colleagues and physician friends. just, because I wanted to help them out and just make sure like, this is really important. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And I just found myself doing that a lot. And then kind of like word got around that I was, I don't know if I'd call myself an expert back then, but just knew more than the average physician. And then I started speaking. And then again, I wasn't really thinking about it in a business. So the White Coat Investor was getting established, Passive Income MD, Physician on Fire. I'm sure these are, blogger. I don't know if I call them bloggers at this point, but they were starting their businesses. And so when I met them, and it was just like a very nice group of people. We all just had the shared passion of sharing this with other physicians to help them, live better, get their finances in order. And, when I was kind of at a crossroads, I had moved to Philadelphia. My son was, I don't know, around one. And I was like, I don't need a side gig as a dermatologist. It's not like I was making good money. So I was making money doing it, not a lot because I wasn't trying to make it a business. And then I worked with a life coach for a year and a half, and I found her randomly on Facebook, by the way. She posted in one of the physician moms group and was just saying she was in coach training, offering free coaching. And so I DM'd her and worked with her for free. And then I paid her for a year. And ultimately I had to make a decision. I was at this crossroads, and I just remember being told, like, you just got to decide. You're either going to do it or you're not. But if you do it, go all in. Otherwise, whatever. And I can't say people always ask me, well, how did you decide? I'm like, I don't know. I think it could have been heads or tails, if I'm perfectly honest. It was not like I had this, light from God or, like a sign that I should do it. So I just decided to do it. And I quickly learned that I really enjoyed the learning of building a business, all things business. And in fact, sometimes I feel like I might enjoy that more than what I actually do. And so that year I kind of dove headfirst into learning everything about online business. It's a whole new world. And I was thrown into these groups of entrepreneurs, and it was like this whole new world and whole new language, people talking about money, people making insane amount of money. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. People can make this kind of money. And, not to belittle them, I'm like, some of these people don't even have college degrees. Like my mind was blown. Because I think a lot of us think like you have to be like smart to make a lot of money. At least, I don't know. I think our upbringing, a lot of us is, get good grades, get a good job type of thing. Right. And so when I saw like this whole new world, I kind of like my brain just exploded. I was like, what is going on here? And they're all helping people, right? Because I think entrepreneurs, ultimately, we're solving problems that we see in the world. So, so they're making a lot of money and making a huge impact to the people that they help. So that was just ultimately fascinating for me. And also, as a money coach, just having my mind blown about the ceiling that we put on ourselves, even as physicians, and also realizing physicians actually don't make a lot of money compared to entrepreneurs.
Wait, Bonnie, you're saying that not every physician is rich?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And I think a few key points that I want to pull out was you mentioned that these things just kind of came along. And I think that they probably came along, but you were also willing to jump in and take action. A lot of times these things come along in our lives, and we either have analysis paralysis and we just have to know all the details and how it's going to play out before we're willing to take action, or we just let it pass us by and you're willing to jump on the boat, you're willing to, take action and go from there. So I think that's huge. The other thing I think that's really important is you were in a room with people who were doing it, right? You were in that room with people who did not have college degrees, and you saw that was possible. And I think that's another thing, is that you just have to be in the room. I love being the dumbest person in the room, which is really easy to be in for me. And so I love being the dumbest person in the room, because that means I'm in the right room. And that's where the doors open. That's where the opportunities come. That's where the networking opportunities really happen. And that's where you see what's possible. And that's something that I'm learning. And, talking with Letty and Kenji recently about Tony Robbins and Unleash the Power Within and a lot of the different events that they've gone to and been a part of. It's like, man, a lot of times we just think, myself included, we just think way too small about what is actually possible.
No, totally. And what you said about being in the room, just connecting yourself. And people always ask me, well, how do I do that? And so the great news is there's so many conferences. Like, you mentioned UPW. I usually recommend, Peter Kim's conference. It's coming up in September. I don't know if you're planning to go, but I always tell people that's a great, obviously my conference, although I'm not doing it next year, but just attending one of these types of events where physicians are going to be there and, they're having different conversations. So that's what I recommend to people. And, once they take that leap, and then sometimes there's like, well, it's hard to get away and blah. And it's like, this is not convenient stuff, but if you want something else for your life, you kind of have to get out of your comfort zone a little.
Yeah. I mean, you're only going to grow as much as you allow yourself to be uncomfortable, and you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I completely agree. It's not convenient, but it's worth it, right? Like that can lead to the convenience later on in your life and the flexibility to practice medicine how you want to and live life how you want to. And so I think that it is huge and definitely something that folks need to think about and ponder, like, hey, what do I really want my life to look like in 3, 5, 10 years? And do that, take action.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do try to evaluate every year, if not more often, just, is this what I want? Like, what do I really want? And I definitely notice myself putting sort of like ceilings on things. Like for example, the other day I was like, it'd be nice to have a house. We're renting right now, a house with a pool. Then I'm like, do I really want to take care of the pool? Like it's a lot of maintenance. I moved here and right after we had 2 hurricanes. I don't think it's a good idea to own here. And so I grapple with that. Like, so am I making that decision because I don't think I can afford that life? Or is it because where I live isn't as important to me as some people? Like I never had the dream of having this big, huge home, but probably because I didn't grow up like that. And so I would rather travel, so.
I agree. I mean, I think we look at things from that fear of abundance, fear of scarcity, and kind of teasing out the two can be really tricky. And I agree too. I'm not one that's like, hey, I need the big fancy house. I'd rather travel. I'd rather spend time with my family. I think, I heard something from my buddy Brian Lubin. He's host of the Action Academy podcast that I think about a lot, and it's called the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule essentially is if you have the means and you're thinking about buying something, doing something, traveling somewhere, and in 10 years, you're going to remember that and tell stories about that, thing, vacation, whatever that may be, then you should do it. And so I try and think about it from that perspective because, once we are old and on our deathbed, we're going to think about the things that we missed out on. We're going to think about those opportunities that we did not take that we should have. And so I think having that lens and that perspective can be really helpful. Plus, we're not taking a lot of these material things with us to the grave anyways.
Yeah, as far as I know, we don't.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think legacy and heritage is way more important from that perspective. Well, that is cool. So what did things look like as you started the business? You're in the room with people who are making way more money than you ever thought imaginable doing this. What did it look like as you were growing and scaling? What are some key pain points that you felt? How did you overcome those as well?
Well, again, I said I really loved learning business. I feel like the first 6 months I was just like on this high because I love learning, like I love learning really random stuff. I don't like watch it on YouTube, but anyway, that's a whole side conversation of just like the random information I have in my head. It's not related to my business. And so the first 6 months was really exciting. And then not that I hit a wall, but then sometimes, you have these feelings of inadequacy, like, well, can I make 7 figures or can I really do that? And I think, the way you're conditioned and your upbringing, my family was, I don't even think they were middle class, lower middle class, maybe below that. So I didn't have that sort of like model of what's possible. Like, obviously I knew people lived better than we did. And so I think sometimes, again, I kind of have that artificial ceiling, and then that carries over to even entrepreneurship, and what can be hard about entrepreneurship is when you have these entrepreneur friends, which I think is critical if you are an entrepreneur, because otherwise people think you're crazy. And if, they're sort of like more successful than you, like there can be a lot of compare and despair. Entrepreneurship, it's not secure in terms of, you're not getting a regular paycheck. Like I am an S Corp, so I do have a quote unquote paycheck, but it's pretty low. And then, distributions are extra. So it's, every month to month or the income can be wildly different. And so being okay with that, there have been times when the cash flow wasn't great in my business and just dealing with that, not making it mean that I suck as an entrepreneur, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of life lessons in entrepreneur. Like I always tell people, like it'll bring up all of the things, it is a fast track to dealing with all the limiting beliefs, all the things that you kind of maybe don't have to deal with. It brings it all up. And it is the biggest vehicle, I think, the biggest and fastest vehicle to personal growth for sure.
Yeah, that is well said. I couldn't agree more. And I think what is it, the valley of despair that every entrepreneur goes through when you're building a business, and that typically hits that 6 to 12 month mark of like, hey, is this something that it's really worth pursuing? Is this something that's really worth doing? And I'm glad you stuck with it. And I think that it is tough for folks to sometimes, climb out of that valley and get to the next mountaintop. Other thing I heard recently was that 12% of all our thoughts go towards comparing
Oh, I
ourselves to
haven't heard
others.
that.
Yeah. I heard that from Tim Tebow, not a reputable source by any means, but I heard that from Tim Tebow was talking on the Sean Ryan show and mentioned that. And yeah, 12%. So true or not,
How is that even measured?
I don't know, but it's a good thought. It's a good thought to kind of process and think through of like, man, even if that is 10% or 5% or 15%, who knows? But I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned comparison in the entrepreneurial space and how there's always going to be someone who is above you.
Always.
But if you're willing to get in the rooms with those people who are above you, a lot of times you're going to pull you up with them as well.
Well, you learn from that. Those are the people you want to learn from. You don't want to be the highest earner in the room, although that definitely feels good. I have the Brene Brown book next to me. It's the Atlas of the Heart, and she talks about comparison, and she says it's automatic because some people say, "Oh, you should stop doing that." So it kind of made me feel better. And if you think about from the evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that we do that because we're always sort of seeing like what our status is. Back in the day, it was really important for us to be accepted and be in a social group for our survival. And so it like makes sense that we're always doing that, right? But then it's when it becomes sort of detrimental that you kind of want to do something about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, back in the day, caveman Carl killed the elk or whatever it may be. And then you feel that comparison and then you learn that new skill and then you learn how to provide for your family. So I think it is evolutionarily important, but I think if we get so preoccupied with the comparison, I mean, I think about social media, for example, right? Like we're seeing a fake version of everybody's best day, right? And then we're comparing that to our worst day. And, you're never going to be able to reach that. And so I think that's why social media can be so dangerous to see that. So that could be a whole other topic of discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, and I do try to share, the not so great things about entrepreneurship, when I can, because again, I think especially when there's other physicians or just other people who want to get into entrepreneurship, I think it's really easy for them to think like, wow, well, she's just successful and it seems so easy, but they don't see all the work and the tears that go into it,
Yeah, I completely agree. Are there any if you're willing to share, are there any specific, events or learning opportunities, if you will, that you've had through entrepreneurship that may be beneficial for folks who are just getting started in their business?
Yeah. In some ways, I feel like, so when people start, I guess you could say they either struggle or they succeed initially. And either one has its pros and cons. Like I was successful initially, but, I also tell people it's not that I was successful for no reason. I had been unknowingly building an audience for 2 years. So I had an audience to sell to. So when you're starting out, you need to have that. You need to find people who, want your services. So when I first sold my online course, I mean, I had 66 people buy, I think, the first time. And then I remember, of course, that felt great. It was $1,000 at the time. And then when I sold it again, it was 33 people. And looking back, it's like, I made that mean so many things. Like, what? How come it's not the same or higher? What am I doing wrong? And then I had my first, at least, the first to express it to me saying that she didn't like the course and she felt like it was a waste of time. I mean, she probably said it a little bit nicer. But I just remember feeling devastated when that happened. And I remember emailing her back, just wanting some feedback, and she never wrote back. But, I think that's the part that's hard especially if you're like the front facing of what you do but now when when that happens to a new entrepreneur, it's actually something to celebrate, because if someone is not happy with you, that means you're out there, But at the time it was devastating. I remember I felt like it took a very long time to get over that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel you there. I have been fortunate that this podcast has gotten a lot of 5-star reviews, but that first not 5-star review, man, dagger to the heart. And it was funny too. I remember it bothered me way longer than it should. And I look back on it now and like their review was like, I don't know, something about the editing or it didn't mean anything. It had nothing to do with me or the content, but I was pissed. And, you just got to let those things roll off you, because if you're willing to put yourself out there, good things are going to happen and you're going to have haters no matter what you do. And let that bother you for a couple minutes and then pick yourself up, dust yourself off and get back after it.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't looked at my reviews lately. Occasionally I do, but I don't look that often. But I remember when I got my first 1-star review, but they didn't write anything. I'm like, that is so not helpful.
Yeah. And then you're left wondering hey, did they mean to click 5 stars with
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Then you're like, you just don't know,
Yeah. Yeah. That is even worse. Yeah. Well, it's just part of it. And I'm glad that you stuck with it. And thanks for encouraging so many other folks as well by sharing that, because I could completely see how that could, be a struggle to have this, really successful course launch. And then the second time, have your attendance cut in half. And so that I'm sure was difficult. How did you overcome that? What did things look like going forward for you, for Wealthy Mom MD and the rest of the business?
Yeah. So I think, you really have to learn business. So obviously I'm in the online space, so it's a little different than, a brick and mortar. The basic principles of business are the same in terms of, marketing and selling and onboarding and delivery. And so you have to learn all that stuff. And what's also hard about entrepreneurship, especially to people like physicians, is we want the plan, the framework, the roadmap, because that's how medicine is. It's you get into med school. As long as you don't totally F up, you will graduate with that MD or DO degree. And, the same thing with residency, but with entrepreneurship, there isn't just one way. And so if anyone listening to this is thinking of starting a business and you hear some business coach saying this is the only way or the best way, they're just full of crap. There are best practices, there are industry trends, and you should be aware about them. But truthfully, you can do entrepreneurship the way you want. And then you also get to see oh, that doesn't feel good to me. I call it bro marketing. It doesn't mean all men are bro marketing, but there's a flavor of marketing called bro marketing, and it's kind of aggressive, and that does not feel good to me. And I've been on sales calls as a client because, I'm a consumer of these types of things too, where they're very vague about the price, and they say okay, the price is this, but if you buy by the end of the call, it's $2,000 less. And I'm like, well, that doesn't feel good to me. And so I think it's really important to kind of check in with your values. Don't hop on the train because it's the new trend. You have to check in with yourself. Does this feel good for the type of business, for my value system? There's so many ways to be successful. And so, you're not selling your soul, so to speak.
I agree. I think there's a million ways to make $1 million. And a lot of times physicians are scared of shiny object syndrome, analysis paralysis. And, I look at it kind of like going to the ice cream shop and getting some free samples to figure out what ice cream you really want to eat. And it can be the same way for your asset class, right? If you're trying to figure out, hey, I want to invest in real estate, but I don't know if I want to do long-term rentals, short-term rentals, residential assisted living, sample them, figure out what you like. I think it becomes more of a problem once you have momentum in that asset class and you realize you like it. It would be like me right now where, we heavily invest in residential assisted living. I think that is the best opportunity now and for decades to come in real estate. Then if I immediately pivoted and was I'm going to go buy apartment complex, that is where it becomes a problem when you have that momentum. But I think otherwise, if you're just getting started, feel free, try the samples and then figure out what you want to eat.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. Yeah. And again, there's going to be common themes. So it's very rare where some person is selling some completely different, weird way compared to other people. So, I think, again, just finding people who do this and asking them how they got started, again, getting into those rooms, going to those conferences, just getting involved with things. And, you don't have to travel to a conference if you don't want to. There's a lot of online events that are going on. And so it's kind of there's no excuse to not being able to get connected with someone,
Yeah, especially in this day and age of Zoom and, webinars and so forth. There's so many different ways to network and be connected. And I mean, heck, even on Zoom, you could turn your camera off and mute your mic and, that at least
listen.
You're there. That's the first step is just showing up, just being there.
Yes, exactly.
I would imagine you feel the same way as me, that entrepreneurship and business is all about relationships. It's all about networking. It's all about being in the room with the right people, which we already hit on. What are some other tips and tricks that you've learned that have really helped you grow and scale your business?
So we talked about, surrounding yourself with other entrepreneurs. I think it's really important to invest in yourself. So this is, either having a business coach, joining a mastermind, and I do see some entrepreneurs, I would say it's mainly physicians. We can be really cheap sometimes, not willing to invest in learning how to run a business. And it's these are skills that you don't have and you need to learn them. So marketing and selling, the business operations, these are all things you need to learn. You don't have to learn it all at once, and you don't need to learn it before you have a business. That's where the analysis paralysis comes in. So I think willing to invest, it could be a course. It doesn't have to be super high ticket. I think that's really important. And that's also how you meet other people, right? When you do those types of things. So that's another thing. And then, you mentioned earlier that I took action. Like, you have to be an action taker and spend as little time in analysis paralysis. So that's where having a community, having a coach can really help, because some people just really need that push,
Yeah, I agree. And, if you were able to go to med school and pass medical school and residency and fellowship, like, you can absolutely achieve financial freedom. You just need to do the things that Bonnie's saying. And it is important. And you're right. We are cheap. That's funny when you say that, because I've had folks, we have a mastermind for assisted living called the Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind. And I've ironically had physicians reach out and they're like, "Hey, is there a physician discount?" And I'm like, "No, like, this is already not an expensive mastermind. So sorry that there's not." It is
kind of ironic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, because all doctors are rich, as we hit on. But yeah, no, it is. And I think that it is so important. And, I know that you're a coach, and I wanted to hit on that. How has coaching changed your life? You worked with that free coach, and then you continued, paid for a year, and then now you are a coach. How has that changed your life from a coaching perspective?
And I have a few right now. I just ended with a one-on-one business coach. I'm in a mastermind. I have a manifestation coach, although I think it's our last call this week. So that's sad. So, I mean, it's changed. How do I even explain the transformation? Because sometimes when I talk to potential clients, I still find it hard to convey how life-changing it is. And everyone has their own sort of different flavor of transformation. And so I think the main thing is that it really shows you what's possible. It shows you how, like, you're in your way. I was trained in a specific type of coaching, like kind of based on the CBT model, or, really examining our thoughts. And it's wild when people find out, like, what my thoughts aren't true and what I can, like, change them. And part of me is like, people need to know about this earlier, like when they're kids even, And so what a gift it is to learn this as an adult, to be able to impart it on your kids if you have kids. But even if you don't, you're probably sure you have friends who have kids, and that's such a gift for them to realize just how much agency they have. And I think, now that I said the word agency, I think it's showing people they have so much more agency than they think. Because I think a lot of physicians, we do victim a little bit. And again, I'm not judging people, but I think there is a culture of learned helplessness in medicine. And so just showing people they have way more agency than they think, and that they need to own it and take it, because it is sometimes easier to be in that victim, mode.
Absolutely. I think you saying that you have difficulty describing it because it's been so transformative, like that's a perfect answer right there, is that coaching can really make all the difference for folks. I know you're doing a whole lot of different things, and predominantly for women physicians. What are you looking forward to in the future?
I haven't asked that question in a while. I'm kind of in the season of really simplifying things, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we like to complicate our businesses. And so I really want a simple business to open up mental space. And, my son needs a bit more time and attention right now. And so that's sort of like, being able to adjust for that. So I'm looking forward to, I guess technically my business is simple. It's not like I have like 20 million things that I sell, but just making it simple. Actually, right before this call, I was talking to a copywriting team. They're going to help me rewrite a bunch of stuff for my main money course, and not being afraid to leverage other people's expertise, because I have spent a lot of time honing my copy and learning how to write copy. Some people outsource it from the get-go. I don't think there's a wrong or right way to do it. To me, it was just important for me to like learn how to get that dialed in. And so just realizing, my time is valuable. And so if this copywriter, I actually met her in the mastermind that I'm in. And so I know she's really good. And a lot of the other folks have used her. Speaking of which, I'm one of the lowest earners in that mastermind.
That's the right place.
Less comparison, just more like sometimes feeling bad about myself. Sometimes, it's like, but I mean, some of these people make wild amounts of money. And then it also is a kick in the butt, because like, wow, they're making so much money doing XYZ. It's just wild what you can make money on. Like I always tell people, I was talking to a lot of physicians lately about their business ideas and like, do you think it could make money? Do you think, I'm like, listen, some lady was selling farts in a jar a few years ago. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And I remember there was like the blizzard in Boston or something like a decade ago, and a guy sold the snow, which was just a jar of water, for like $50, and he made like 50 grand. And so, yeah, there's a million ways to make $1 million.
They say, someone said you can make $1 million, you can have a $10 million business selling rocks.
I believe it.
I'm sure whoever's listening is probably going to have something a bit more valuable and a better solution for people than a rock or a fart in a jar. And so it just goes to show you, like, we're all consumers, we're buying stuff, so it's like, why wouldn't, especially physicians, like, our skill set, maybe because a lot of people say, or doctors I talk to, they're like, well, I don't have any other skills. I'm like, what are you talking about?
So many skills: leadership, critical thinking, how to think on your feet, how to make decisions quickly. I mean, how to analyze different problems and solve them. I mean, physicians are amazing entrepreneurs if they're just willing to believe that they can be an amazing entrepreneur.
Yeah. And we can learn very quickly because there is a lot of stuff to learn and it's all learnable. But it's interesting when they think like, oh, it's really hard to learn business. And it's like, dude,
learning
you could get through med school.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That is so true. Well, that is awesome. Well, I love what you're doing, and thanks for being such a strong voice in the space and a strong voice for women physicians in particular. How can folks reach out to you if they want to do some coaching with you, or they want to learn more about your money course, or they just want to know more about you?
Yeah, the best way is to just find me on Instagram. Wealthy Mom MD is my handle. So obviously no spaces in between. That's also my website. It's also the name of my podcast. In fact, I haven't podcasted in like 2 months, since February, actually. I'm looking at the date. And so actually an episode aired today, finally.
That's awesome. It's the little wins. Well, if you have wealthy dad MDs on there ever, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to be a guest.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, Bonnie, is there anything else that you want to hit on before we wrap things up?
No, I think, if you're listening, you're someone who's interested in thinking bigger. And so just don't be afraid to take a step.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's all keep thinking bigger together and keep changing the world. So with that, it's been Dr. Bonnie Koo and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast, signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.